Good morning, California. Good afternoon, Boston, and guten Abend to Germany. Welcome members, friends, and guests of the German-American Business Council of Boston. I am Susan Glovsky, a member of the Board of Directors of the GABC, and I welcome you as our guests joining us virtually from Boston, around the country, and in Europe. The German-American Business Council is a member-based business association in Boston. The topic of our German-American Economic Forum this year is Technologies Powering Smart Cities. Today's event is the sixth in our series of virtual panel discussions on the Technology Powering Smart Cities topic. We have tentatively scheduled a hybrid German-American Economic Forum for October 26, 2021. Please put this in your calendar and whatever the current equivalent of penciling it in, and stay tuned for further announcements. In our previous 5 Smart Cities online panels, questions about the future of mobility came up frequently. Whether we talked about energy efficiency in the built environment, or about digital technology in urban planning and city operations, it is clear that people have a need to be mobile. We know that movement in cars, buses, and even motorcycles causes carbon dioxide emissions. I suppose bicycles don't, but not everyone's riding their bike. With cities striving to become carbon neutral before 2050, addressing the challenges of mobility becomes increasingly crucial to the success of a low carbon transition. Today, we will learn how e-mobility and electrifying our roads may help cities in this transition. Please join me in welcoming our speakers who represent the infrastructure, automotive, and materials industries. I am thrilled to introduce John DeBoer, who leads the North American eMobility and Future Grids business for Siemens. In this role, he is responsible for accelerating Siemens' leadership in eMobility infrastructure across all vehicle categories through customer-centric solution offerings for the diverse requirements of this industry. John is an inventor on 15 patents, and that gets me perked up. I know that my colleagues are as well, since we're patent lawyers. 15 patents for technologies facilitating e-mobility solutions. Spencer Reeder is Director of Government Affairs and Sustainability at Audi. I love my Q5. Audi of America. Spencer is responsible for leading the Audi US public policy voice on zero emissions vehicles, EV charging infrastructure, and associated energy sector issues, in addition to providing overall leadership on the brand's sustainability strategy and initiatives. Moderating this discussion is Niko Palosuo. I knew I was going to trip over your name. I'm sorry, Niko. Head of Global External Communications at Covestro. He is an international communications and public affairs aficionado. I saw that on his LinkedIn. Originally from Finland, Niko worked as a journalist in daily newspapers and trade media in Finland, Germany, and Hong Kong before he joined the corporate world in the high-tech pharmaceutical and chemical industries. And it looks like Niko has had an important place in the corporate world. I see a message on Covestro's website that innovation and sustainability are the driving forces behind the continuous development of its products, processes, and facilities. At this time, the German-American Business Council would like to say thank you and acknowledge Siemens as our lead sponsor for this year's German-American Economic Forum on Technologies Powering Smart Cities, including this event series and our upcoming forum. Thank you. And with that, I will pass the screen to Niko to lead us through today's program.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. And privileged to host this conversation. Pleasure to be here. So transportation accounts for about 30% of the US greenhouse gas emissions. So I think we have a really relevant topic here. And it's great to have Spencer from Audi and John from Siemens to discuss what it really takes to get that number down to zero. A couple of words about Covestro. What is our role in this? Well, like Audi and Siemens, we're also a global company with roots in Germany. We develop and manufacture advanced polymers and high-performance plastics in North America and around the world. And you can find products, for example, our products inside insulation boards that make houses more efficient, in furniture, medical devices, also a lot in vehicles, in which they replace glass and metals, such as in car exterior and interior parts, headlights, sunroofs, seats, dashboards, you name it. And of course, not to forget the paint coatings that keep the vehicle durable for decades. So pretty much anything you touch in a vehicle has a high likelihood of coming from Covestro's products. Electric mobility is, of course, also a big growth driver for Covestro because strong plastic parts reduce the weight and in that way help reduce the range anxiety, something we'll be talking today about. And of course, enable new features in the future of mobility where people don't drive themselves anymore. What do you do when the vehicle is driving on its own? I think that's also an interesting question about mobility. What do you do with the time, like work or use for entertainment? But enough about Covestro. And by the way, behind me in my virtual studio, let me show it to you real quickly because we'll be using this also in our interactive sessions. I am in Cologne. In our virtual studio behind me, you can see one of our concept vehicles we have made to help companies like Audi to come up with innovation for electric mobility. And we'll be using this studio to get some interactivity I'll be talking about shortly. But let's get a frame for today's talk. The Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, and I hope I pronounced that right, has pledged to drive e-mobility in the States and invest in the infrastructure that enable it, such as building 500,000 charging stations. And at the same time, there are differences in the charging infrastructure and in the way how they operate. So questions like, how do you really make the grid work for e-mobility? How do you standardize the charging systems? And how do you develop the charging behavior, which I think about what do you do while your EV is charging? I think also an interesting topic, because we know that, at least from today, and we might learn something new about this today, but as far as I know, it still takes longer to charge your EV than it takes to fill up a gas tank. So I think super interesting questions. So let's start with a couple of introductory remarks from John and Spencer. But before we go there, make sure you join the discussion by participating in our Slido polls with the hashtag GABC. And let me put up already the first question up. And it is right here. The question is as follows. What words come to your mind when you hear the word electric vehicle? So I think we will have quite interesting topics and opinions on that topic. So as we have our conversation with John and Spencer, please write your comments, questions, and protests if you have them in the chat, and we'll follow along real time. So as you have your say over there in the virtual space, maybe, John, you could start as your company is making sure the country can be electrified in the first place. And then we'll go there with Spencer how to make the best use of electricity once you, John, have delivered the electricity where it belongs. So, yeah, John, over to you.
First, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here today. John DeBoer, responsible for the eMobility business here at Siemens. And I'll say this whole greenhouse gas topic is something very personal to us. As a company, we've decided by 2030 we will be carbon net neutral. And our biggest challenge, when we look at actually living and doing this, is the transportation sector. The last decade, we got 60% of the way to our carbon net neutrality goals, but that was focused around energy efficiency, making our buildings cleaner, starting to work on the source of our centralized procurement of power. And as we go to the second step and we go to zero, transportation is at the heart of what we need to do. So what I'd like to briefly share is why is it hard, and what are all the areas that are actually associated with this journey. And when we look at transportation electrification, it is a complete change of the city landscape. This infrastructure is not just the charger that goes in your garage, and it's not just about, hey, how can the grid handle it, but it's about transforming infrastructure, which is why we're so excited about what's happening at the federal level as we start to look at 500,000 charging stations for the United States, because we're critically far behind here. But when we look at this transition, it is changing in so many different places, from the home to parking garages, to factories, to workplaces. And very often in the narrative, one part that is missing is that we also have to electrify the transportation of goods. So amazing companies like Amazon and their pledge, FedEx, UPS, the US Postal Service, all are changing at the same time. And it's us coming together in this sort of landscape to electrify transport is what really moves the needle on carbon, what cleans up air, what makes our cities awesome places to live, and what changes that appearance in the skyline. But in the end, as you actually go through this transition of infrastructure, you have to go from a parking lot full of concrete to an electrified hub. And that's hard. That is not as simple as buy an appliance and stick it in the ground and hope it works. And so that's a part of what we do in the journey here at Siemens. We work on something called the plug to grid experience. It's about addressing all of the different infrastructure elements. We are one of hundreds of companies that are a part of this journey, but we see the need to actually transform not just the charging infrastructure, the grid upgrades, the training of the next generation of service technicians and experts, but a true transformation of infrastructure in the landscape. So I can't wait for the panel discussion today and to get into those things in further detail.
Thanks. Thanks, John, for these introductory remarks. Let's, before we go over to you, Spencer, let's just take a look on what is the poll so far. Thank you for a wonderful audience for making your comments so far. We have 9 and there's room for more. So speed. It's interesting to see what Spencer makes out of that. But Spencer, maybe you can set the stage on how the world and America can get forward with the electrification and the reduction of emissions from the Audi perspective.
Well, thank you. And first, let me make sure folks can hear me okay, because I know there was some audio problems.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Niko. Thanks to the German American Business Council. It's great to be here. I'm Spencer Reeder. I'm based out of California. So greetings from the West Coast. Good morning. From sunny California. I guess it's snowing in Boston. So we have quite the contrast in weather today. Listen, it's such an interesting topic because you have the convergence of so many different, what previously were disparate areas of responsibility, the electricity system, the energy delivery system, and transportation, and they're converging in a way that no one would have anticipated even a decade ago. So I think there will be some good conversation. Frankly, I want to get into the interaction with the people online to answer questions, but let me talk a little bit about Audi's journey to electric mobility. And Niko, at the outset, you mentioned that on average, 30% of the emissions from greenhouse gases come from the transportation sector. Out west, it's actually over 50% in most states. And it has been that way for a long time because we, as John likely knows, and then maybe other people on the call, we've had the benefit of cleaner energy supply in the West, primarily hydroelectric, but also geothermal, lots of solar. So the ground conditions for electric mobility here in the West have been quite good. And now we see this really extrapolating across the entire country with the Biden-Harris administration prioritizing eMobility. Fortunately for Audi, we've been ahead of the game. I mean, we launched our first all-electric vehicle in the fall of September of 2018, the Audi e-tron. We've just announced yesterday, in fact, the timing of this is quite good, the Q4 e-tron, that'll be The two different variants of that model will be our fourth and fifth all-electric vehicles that we bring to the US market, in addition to the 3 plug-in hybrids. So we'll be, by the end of 2021, we'll have 8 electric vehicles in the US market, which we think is unrivaled, actually, if you look at the math there. So our commitment is unambiguous. We have 15 billion committed to this technology development over just the next 4 years. And I'll throw up a couple pictures here as I'm talking of some of the product, so you can see it as we're talking here. Here in this image, you see a Q4 e-tron prototype and the e-tron GT, which is our top of the line sports car, all electric. It was featured in a Super Bowl ad 2 years ago. And we're very excited about it, actually, well, 2.5 years ago now. Very excited about that vehicle that was just revealed as well and is in the market this summer. But we're looking not just at the vehicle, we're looking at how we manufacture the vehicle. So really cradle to grave, a full life cycle assessment of our sustainability initiatives. It's really part of really how we're going to approach this transformation in the industry. So it begins and ends with the vehicle, of course. Those tailpipe emissions, getting people into electric vehicles is really where we're focused. But we are obviously not going to stop there. We're going to be looking across the board. And maybe in terms of these opening statements, I'll just conclude by saying that Audi is going to remain committed to the things that made us a compelling brand, which is that we provide a really great experience in the vehicle. That's not going to change. Here you see an image of a new heads-up display that'll be offered in the Q4 e-tron. This is our entry point into the brand that's going to offer some of the leading technology that Audi has to offer. So below $45,000, you can get into an all-electric Audi SUV. That's a great entry point for the brand. We're super excited about being able to offer that product. The German tagline, of course, as most of you are familiar, Vorsprung durch Technik, progress through technology. That really was defined by the development and refinement of the Audi Quattro system in the 1970s and 1980s. We were the first automaker to bring LED headlight technology. In fact, lighting, both interior and exterior lighting, remained a highly, I guess, almost benchmark technology for the Audi brand, and we continue to make great investments in lighting. But this Vorsprung durch Technik is going to be applied to eMobility, and we really see this as an opportunity for the brand to continue to establish ourselves as leader in technology, a leader in that driving experience, making a compelling experience for our customers. And so, yeah, with that, these are just some images of some of the electric vehicles. We're going to actually have at a global level 20 all-electric vehicle models by 2025. So again, the commitment is unambiguous from Audi. We're excited to be part of this new revolution and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks, John. And I think we already have a question from the commentary, which may come back a little bit later on regarding the cradle-to-cradle sustainability, especially battery sourcing, battery recycling. I think these are also topics and sometimes concerns on people's minds. And I think we can also see the concerns on people's mind when we look at the Slido comments so far. So yes, speed, range, charging stations, sustainability seems to be a really, people do not only drive electric cars for convenience reasons, but they actually want to make the world a better place, to borrow a tagline of my company. So I want to discuss now a little bit more about what is the role of electric vehicles in comparison to the other fuel sources that are out there to create less emissions. I used to drive trucks, and if I drive a truck, it takes about 30 liters of diesel in Europe per 100 kilometers. So that's certainly something that is creating a lot of emissions. And there are talks about replacing diesel with hydrogen as one additional way of reducing the emissions in the city. So my question to you is that how do you see what are the alternatives for cities to reduce their emissions next to electric mobility and batteries? Maybe John, you start with that because you're looking at the holistic energy provision of cities in whole, not only electric mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would certainly comment that an interesting thing about 2021 is it has definitely been the year of the truck for the non-passenger segment for eMobility. What we have seen is a tremendous rise in city centers around both the movement of goods, particularly in the last mile segment, as well as public transportation electrifying. So when we move beyond kind of the passenger duty segment, what we're actually seeing is it's not some future dream of could we electrify transport, but it's happening right now today. It's presenting new challenges, and those new challenges are in many cases associated with the infrastructure. How do you deal with building out these new energy depots? How do you put them together? Where do you put them? Do you share them or not? There are many new functions that have to come together in order to build these at scale. But I would say that when we look at the energy landscape and mix, that we are seeing across the board electrification as a very prominent trend in the industry. That being the case, there are of course many forward-looking technologies, hydrogen being one of them, that are in the future energy landscape for sure. But what I can say in 2021, right here today, is a very broad electrification theme.
Yeah, and I would just echo that from Audi's standpoint. Even as recent as 2 years ago, we were evaluating a number of alternative drivetrains, alternative fuels. I mean, I don't know what John's view on this, but I think just in the last 24 months, there's been a pretty definitive movement towards electrification and really a distancing from these other technologies. Not that there isn't a future opportunity to be had. As you know, Audi is part of the Volkswagen Group. We have MAN and Scania in Europe. We have a major share in Navistar. So we're also thinking about the larger duty, larger segments. And here again, I mean, the chairman of Volkswagen Group, Dr. Herbert Diess, also made a fairly strong statement recently, just a few days ago, that even for trucking, electrification appears to be where we're headed as well. And in the light duty space, I don't think there's a question. I mean, and again, just speaking for Audi, hydrogen just isn't penciling out. It doesn't seem to be a real viable approach at all for light duty.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for these comments. And I think we are now getting also to the topic of range, which also was actually in the middle of our Slido point. So people are kind of wondering, because that's, I think, with a gasoline tank, if you kind of fill up the tank with something that will make electricity or burns, you have a still longer range than with battery technology today. So the question is, actually to both of you, how do you see this range? How do we reduce the range anxiety of the people who are maybe not yet driving an electric vehicle, are considering it? We all know that the percentage of EVs in the US is still quite low. So how do you kind of make the people believe that actually it is a viable option and there is more range coming? I guess that's the promise I would expect. Before, maybe with Spencer, we start with you. Let me put up my next Slido question on this very topic. Thank you very much for the World Cloud On Association. And it's up there right now. How much electric range is enough for your EV? I think we have a lot of Audi drivers here in the audience. I wonder why. But let's see what the audience thinks about what is really range. As Spencer, you take it off on what you believe is the direction of reducing the range anxiety.
Well, I'll start my response actually with a question back to everyone. Do you know how much range your gas vehicle has?
That's a good question.
Maybe a few of you do, but I would venture to guess that most people don't know precisely how much range their gas vehicle
Put
has.
it in the comment box, please, if you do know.
And the reason why is that the refueling of that vehicle is sort of trivial, right? I mean, whether or not you have 250, 280, 320 miles of range in your gas or diesel vehicle, it's somewhat irrelevant because you know you can fill it up. And that's going to be the case, we think, with electric vehicles as well shortly. There's a fixation, I'd argue, on range and almost sort of like an arms race, which vehicle has the most range. As John does his job and gets this infrastructure installed, as we focus on educating our customers and getting charging at home, which is a whole new paradigm, right? It's a different experience. You wake up every morning and you've got a full, quote unquote, tank of fuel. In this case, electricity or potential energy stored in your battery. And so that really changes the whole fueling relationship. And with the proliferation of DC fast charging and that availability, then the confidence about being able to refuel your vehicle, I think takes away this fixation on, oh, is it 350 or do I need 320? As long as you know, hey, in 15 or 20 minutes, I can get 50 to 80% charge on my battery at grab a cup of coffee and maybe grab a sandwich or something and be on my way again if I'm doing a long trip, then this whole fixation on range goes aside. That said, we are looking, there's obviously a direct one-to-one relationship between the purchase price of the vehicle and the amount of battery we put in the vehicle. And so, the Audi e-tron, it's a big, full, capable SUV. I know some of you are driving that. It's got a 95 kilowatt hour battery. There's a cost with that. The e-tron Q4 will have an 82 kilowatt hour battery with 77 kilowatt hours of available capacity. It's lighter. The range, it's got 250 miles of range. And well, if you believe the WLTP, the European standard, it's got 323 miles of range. So depending on whether or not you want to trust the EPA or WLTP, but we have to talk about EPA range here in the US, so 250 miles. That's my official announcement. But regardless, I think we would say that's plenty of range. Now, can we put more battery in our vehicles? Sure. And we will, and we'll provide some flexibility for our customers, those that feel they need that additional range, but there'll be a cost with that. And every automaker is wrestling with what's the sweet spot. And as recharge rates go up and you can do this in 10, 15 minutes, then, we think that becomes less of a fixation, as I said.
Thanks, Spencer. It certainly sounds like, you're making the whole range topic irrelevant for the usage. And let's see what our audience thinks right now. We have also some great comments in the comment box. Thank you very much. So it's certainly, it looks like there is a thirst for range. And this actually brings me to the question to John before we go back to Spencer, because of course the question is regarding time. How do you fill up 400 miles with the grid that is able to support that if you have like 10 families coming to the same electrified gas station at the same time and everyone wants to charge electricity for 400 miles? Is that reality today, or will it be reality? And how do you make it reality, John?
Yeah, and the first interesting thing about an electric car, as Spencer alluded to, you fuel it at home. And I'll tell you, both my wife and I drive electric cars. Nothing makes us happier than to wake up in the morning and know it's full. It's a great way to start the day. So what we focused on as Siemens, first and foremost, was charging at home. And we put 75,000 charging stations out into the United States. And it was the most successful thing we did worldwide when we were first starting as a company, because that's at the heart of the start of the experience. But it doesn't stop there. So as we get into this next decade here, what we're seeing is an incredible need to build out workplace charging, multifamily dwelling charging, and gas station charging. And I think a lot of times, because we come from a kind of gas station model, right? That's where our heads go right away. All we need is electrified corridors. But if you lose one of the most exciting experiences when that's the only thing you live against, and it's the fact you just don't even have to incorporate it in 90% of your life. And so that's maybe a first key point. And when we get to that point, we do have to make sure that homes are able to sustainably scale up as they electrify every vehicle that sits in the garage. And so a part of what we've been working on as a company is intelligent charging solutions, good load management, good collaboration with the utilities so that we can plan. But we've noticed that there's actually a virtuous cycle to eMobility, and it's counterintuitive. As we're adding more and more EVs to the grid, we're actually able to handle higher renewable energy concentrations, because this is one of the most shapeable loads that has ever been added to the electric grid. And so as we build out infrastructure, we're actually finding that there's a positive correlation between EV deployment, renewable energy deployment, and kind of the scale up to clean energy supply for transportation. So that's maybe point number one. Now, point number two, you absolutely cannot dismiss the important need for corridor electrification. We have to link our cities together. Right. We have to make sure that there is adequate nationwide infrastructure. And when we compare the US to the rest of the world, it's behind, right? Full statement, full fact. And so we're really excited by what's happening at a federal level today. 500,000 charging points helps. It helps move things in a very positive direction. It's not one magic solution for this entire transformation, but it's a very powerful indicator of what the United States is capable of and towards the future of where this industry is heading. So in total, when we kind of bring these things together, it starts at home, we add workplaces, and we ensure that there's adequate nationwide highway charging corridors.
Thanks, John. And I think you bring the word of collaboration here to a really important topic, because if you want to travel across the 50 states, you need collaboration, you need standards, you need the availability of the power where you need it, something you just talked about, John, earlier. How much, where are the brakes currently? I mean, who is coming, or not who, but what is creating the handbrake in the collaboration to make charging stations more interoperable, that you don't need a specific utility card to be able to fill up your battery? So where are the challenges right now in the States?
Yeah, Niko, and you get to one that I'll say is really a passion of Siemens and a passion of mine, which is open standards, open access is critical for this infrastructure. And what we found in the United States in the early days was that there were very clever entrepreneurs who were using government dollars to build out proprietary networks. And it was something that was different than Europe, it was different than China. And so one of the things that we advocate for very vocally is to ensure that charging infrastructure can be used and paid for with the same ways that we fill with gasoline today. Credit cards, cash, normal payment methods have to be a part of the equation, not subscriptions, not proprietary networks. And it has held the United States back. I think it's something where we see it at the federal, state, and even the participation with electric utilities is improving, but it's something that we have to continue to push forward with, I will say, a focus and an intensity if we're going to ultimately succeed and ensure that the US stays on pace with the rest of the world in this amazing transformation.
Spencer, what's your take on driving seamlessly an Audi from California to Boston? What does it take?
I would echo what John just said. We are full supporters of open standards and interoperability. We think that's critical. We have a perhaps obvious relationship with Electrify America, but they are using an open standard as well and are advocates for that. No, it's critical. I mean, this can't be a complicated transaction for people. The more complexity, the more layers of authentication or figuring out, am I a member of this network or that network, that becomes just another barrier to entry. And our business model is reliant on people increasingly moving towards eMobility. That's where our investment lies. So this is super important. I would definitely underscore that.
Thanks, Spencer. I think we're getting a lot of questions actually to you, Spencer, regarding specifics, specifics of cars. So I thank you again for putting in the questions. I think this is really good insights. I think, like Paul is commenting, I can drive from Boston to Southern Vermont for a ski weekend over a tank of gas. That should be the key and the measure of range. I love that. I want to pick up this one. What is the latest impact on temperature? Do batteries degrade at -5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit? Is the question. So temperature and battery. I can relate to this very well, coming from Finland, where we have -30. I know in some Midwestern states you also have really low temperatures, which may have an impact. You want to talk about that, Spencer?
Well, yeah, and with even conventional drivetrains, you got to plug in your block heater, right, when you live in the very cold environment. So
absolutely.
Not that the conventional systems are immune from temperature either. No, certainly you see a decrease in range. It's not a permanent degradation of the battery. And I'm not going to go into too many specifics because I'm not qualified to do that in terms of the specific impacts. But you do see a reduction in range. Anyone who would tell you otherwise would be disingenuous in extreme cold temperatures, but that recovers. And certainly the thermal management system of our battery has been something our engineers in Ingolstadt have spent a lot of careful time thinking about. And so, we think that the Audi product suffers much less than other products in that regard. And this will be a technology that continues to improve in terms of how you manage that thermal environment of the battery so that you're seeing not a severe impact from the cold temperature. But it is an issue for sure.
It's always reassuring to hear that you are trying to make these topics irrelevant. People don't think about anymore. I think in the past also with mobile phones, they kind of froze because there was no electricity left in the battery. And of course, I think battery technology has improved a lot since then. I want to take up the question from Doris. Thank you, Doris, for the question as well, because you're talking about, and I'm leaning into the screen if you are wondering, because it's such a small text at Zoom. How do you see the discussion of recharging and just swapping the battery for a new one? I know in China, there are some electric vehicles who have this swap battery kind of ideology to facilitate that forward movement without recharging. You want to comment on that? Maybe Spencer and John both?
I'll start, and John probably has some thoughts as well. This was tried in the US, I don't know, maybe a decade ago. And it didn't really pan out. I mean, if you think about the battery as an integral part of the vehicle, the way that we design the Audi, it's part of the crash worthiness, actually, the whole battery containment system, and making sure that in the case of any kind of collision, that the passenger is safe, that the system is integral.
And they're really good polycarbonates, I have to say, which are facilitating that safety. Just on the material side of things, just as a side note.
Well, we actually have a aluminum frame around ours, but there are some polycarbonates there too, I'm sure. But it is part of our structure. It's an aluminum frame that's crash worthy. So to be able to sort of access that and pull out modules, and it's so, in terms of the design and function of the battery, it's so integrated that it would be hard for us to imagine that moving forward. Maybe for other segments, and John may have some thoughts here, maybe there's still an opportunity for that kind of model in a medium or heavy duty vehicle, but yeah, I don't see it in the light duty.
To be honest, I would only echo your comments that it was tried a decade ago. I think it was something as Siemens we looked very closely at. Probably the most optical reference I can give is look at the vehicles that are around our communities. Cars, buses, trucks, bikes. Look at the different sizes, frames, shapes. And I think this is where this was an interesting concept, but that in conjunction with the incredible infrastructure and insurance aspects that were associated with the transfer of such a high value asset just didn't pencil out in the end. And what we're seeing now, and I can equate this in many respects to solar from a decade ago, was that there were a lot of crazy, cool, novel, innovative kind of edge ideas, and the industry started to consolidate rapidly. And in the last 2 years, that's what we've seen with the electrification of transport. It's turned into plugging in cars, trucks, buses, and bikes into infrastructure and going and moving at scale. And we're finding incredible cost effectiveness and efficiencies. We're finding the scale up. So I think while there's really many cool, innovative ideas, when we start to talk about the 80-20 rule or the 90-10, we're seeing a massive consolidation around the plugging in of vehicles to solve the electrification of transport.
Right. So, and I think we are getting also now to the topic, and I think we have a great question regarding that from Susan. Thank you, Susan, for your questions. Regarding the environmental costs for cities in electric power being used. I want to connect this topic to that, also to the topic of battery vehicles and plug-in hybrids. So cars which have both. Spencer, your models, I'm sure you actually mentioned there are models where you have part electric and part gasoline fueled. Because the question is, I think, how do we kind of mitigate that from now to the complete zero emissions? What is the role of plug-in models or hybrid models on the way there? Before we go into the topic, let me ask another question to our wonderful audience. We have now 14 votes. Thank you. It's a record. Let's see if we can get even more answers in the next. The question on Slido is as follows. By when will the United States have more charging stations than fuel stations? And I think this also comes to the topic that Susan, you pointed out. What are the environmental costs, particularly in cities, to use electric power being used? And I think, John, this comes to you because you need, well, renewable fuel sources. to
Yep.
enable emissionless from a city perspective. So maybe you can comment on that and also talk about the hybrid solution as an in-between solution.
Sure, sure. And there is some important misnomers that are out there about, and there's been some wonderful papers done that I'm happy to share as a reference around total life cycle carbon and the electric vehicle. And there's this fear in the background, like, the US is all coal, and they'll refer to data from 2001 as the basis for, hey, this is a carbon intensive thing, the electrification of transport. And it's just misinformed and misguided. What we're seeing across the board, and it's an important transition for the United States, is the rapid cleanup of our grid. And it's happening across the board. It's happening at a high double-digit rate. And even in those areas where it is not zero carbon technologies, we're finding that the general carbon footprint of the grid is rapidly improving. That's kind of element number one behind the scenes. And it's important when we look at the fuel sources for electric vehicles today, that we're looking at the grid conditions of today and not the grid from 1 or 2 decades ago, which unfortunately in many cases, that's the data people have for their frame of reference. So that's kind of point number one. Point number two is that what we're actually starting to see is this whole topic around like energy storage is happening in an incredible way at scale today. It's not some future dream state. Siemens, we don't always advertise it in the best way. We have a joint venture called Fluence. We've become at the same par with Tesla as the largest fixed battery storage provider in the world. And it's happening actually with the grids is where those batteries are going in to handle the intermittency, the volatility, and the natural dynamics that are associated with our modern day infrastructure. And the US is actually the single largest country for that infrastructure to be deployed. So I think, when I take these different pieces and I put them together, we're accelerating towards clean energy in our power generation. We have a zero emissions vehicle, and that is creating at the end of the day a lower and lower carbon footprint, a cleaner and cleaner city, better air quality, and a better experience. So these are kind of how the factors come together. I would say, as I certainly would default to Spencer on the vehicles. When I look at the infrastructure side and plug-in hybrids, we saw a lot of that over this, I will say, last decade. It was a very critical thing. What we are increasingly seeing, at least for our business, is a trend towards true electric at an unprecedented clip. There's something in the experience associated with that, and we're seeing the demand for our infrastructure to be sized and scaled for those 100% electric vehicles at an increasing speed. Is it done? Absolutely not. But that's just our vantage point from the infrastructure side.
That's fascinating, John. And again, that vision of emissionless can also only be achieved without burning fuels, even in a hybrid. We all see these pictures and memes on Twitter where people are driving an electric vehicle and they're towing a diesel generator, or electric cars being charged next to a coal plant, which actually here in Germany does happen. So the tailpipe emissions may be zero, but the overall emissions are quite something else. Spencer, I would love to get your view on what is your path towards, because you have like tens of models coming out from Audi alone in this subpart. What is the phasing out idea of, or do you have already made decisions regarding that? And also, as you come that, I have to also mention the question from Nicole. Thank you, Nicole, for the question. It's about recyclability of batteries, which I think also comes up. So if you can cover these two topics, Spencer.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the plug-in hybrid question, and I think our public commitments I think are a good indication of how we view plug-in hybrids. So we've committed to 30 electric vehicles by 2025, 30 different models. 20 of those will be all electric. So you can see the ratio: 2/3 all electric, 1/3 hybrid, and that's only going to go heavier and heavier towards the all electric. We're committed. Listen, we acknowledge we're going through a transition. Just as a level set, I don't know what people's perception is, but you might ask yourself, what percent of new car sales in the US are electric vehicles? So you didn't have that as a quiz, but I'll pause for a moment, let people guess in their own minds what that is. It's about 2%. So that means 98% of the vehicles being sold today in the US on average, 97 hopefully this year, are not electric, right? They're
Wow.
gas, they're mild hybrid, plug-in hybrids would be included in the electric category. So we have a long ways to go. In spite of Audi's commitment, that we have to bring our customers along as well. And so we have to provide a portfolio that meets our customers where they are today, but we're really, in terms of our marketing investment, what we talk about on social media, how we position the brand, it is about this electric transformation. We're fully committed to that. The plug-in hybrid will have some lifespan in that transition. Frankly, it'll be driven somewhat by regulation, federal and state regulation here in the US, how are plug-in hybrids viewed in the regulatory construct, what's allowable, if you will, as you get to more and more stringency in these state goals. That'll essentially drive the industry. And Audi is going to pay close attention. We're nimble. We can pivot and change the proportions of this model versus that model as we see things evolve and where the demand from our customers is coming from. So that's the question on plug-in hybrids. Listen, I mean, you're jamming 2 drivetrains into one vehicle. It doesn't seem like a long-term solution, right? But we're going to continue to provide that technology for those folks that need it. I just wanted to diverge 1 second and return to John's topic, because I think it's critical. We have a clean grid in the US today by any sort of global standard. Coal plants have been shutting down right and left over the last 5 years at a sort of dizzying pace. And I'm going to just offer up something provocative, because I know this is a German audience. 60% of the carbon-free energy, and this is the key phrase when you think about our energy system, carbon-free, not renewable. Renewable is an important part of that, comes from nuclear. I know that this is not a topic that people like to talk about in Europe, but it's a critical part of our grid. And we have to sort of get our arms around carbon-free. That's the goal. When we think about climate change, it's reducing the carbon emissions, reducing fossil fuels. So knowing that it's provocative, knowing that it makes people uncomfortable, I'm just gonna, as a former energy person, say we need to reassess our relationship with nuclear power. In the US, it's not nearly as fraught as it is in Europe. There's new technologies that are being introduced. The Department of Energy under the Biden administration is going to be making new research investments. So I would just implore people to try to broaden their minds around carbon-free energy. And this includes other things too, of course, tidal, geothermal, and John can probably elaborate on the various sources of carbon-free energy that are really going to be critical to give us a robust grid. On the sustainability of batteries, I'm just going to say one quick thing. Everyone has one of these. This has a lithium-ion battery inside of it. We've been carrying these around for a long time. The sustainability of the battery supply is not a new topic. It didn't arrive with the electric vehicle. We have laptops, we have cellular phones, we have all kinds of other devices that are powered with lithium-ion. And there is a burgeoning industry that knows how to recycle and repurpose the materials. And there's some really exciting companies here in the US and presumably elsewhere as well that already know how to do that. It's really the business case. Where's the demand for those materials? Can the costs of the processing be brought down in line with what's needed to create a robust supply chain on the back end for these batteries? So I think our view is that's coming, that we're working hard on that with others in the industry. And I would say that there's a little bit of I think an understandable fear, but a little bit of a mythology around, oh my gosh, what do we do with these batteries from electric vehicles? We know actually how to handle them. It's just building that marketplace around it.
Thanks, Spencer. And I think that covers Nicole's question. And I can assure you, in Finland, we actually have a lot of nuclear power. So we charge up electric vehicles with nuclear power, with, let's say, no emissions, no carbon emissions, at least. Let's, before John, because I think there are a lot of questions also for you regarding the energy sources, also a really good comment or question regarding geothermal energy. But before we go there, let's see what our audience thinks. And thank you, we do have a record of 14 votes, yes. By 2040, so in 19 years, 43% believe there will be more charging stations than fuel stations. So it won't take so long anymore before you have to figure out what do you do in a gas station, because you're no longer filling up your tank. There's actually a big culture around what do you do in a gas station. People go to the gas station to live their lives. So this is another topic, but we have to kind of, I know there have been studies, what do you do with former gas stations? And their role and function completely changes. But let's not go there. Let's go, John, to the topic of energy generation and the sustainability of energy generation. And also if you could comment on the question regarding using geothermal as part of the package. How do you see that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to be an expert to comment on the geothermal mix as of today. What I can just say as it relates to the US grid supply, in terms of what we've been experiencing as a company, is one, a unprecedented growth clip for both Siemens and the Siemens Energy business, which is an independently held company for wind turbine business. Have been growing at a very high double-digit rate for several years now in the renewable energy rate as sources. We are seeing, very similar to what Spencer described, an energy mix shift down from coal, natural gas still holding in the United States, nuclear held at a lower level but stable. And you always have to be very local when you talk about energy supply. As soon as you go to the Northeast or the Northwest, you find very strong water-based power sourcing as a core element of the grid. And so, both with Niagara as well as up in the Northwest and the Seattle area. So as we start to talk about the mix with electric vehicles, it's not as linear as there's power during the day from solar, from the sun, nothing at night. As we see these different mixes of wind and water, we're finding different, very local problems are oftentimes associated with the local needs. The other thing that's been interesting, and I remember kind of smirking a decade ago when I was at the National Renewable Energy Lab, and they were like, hey, there's this thing called vehicle to grid. And it was like, yeah, right, these batteries, when is this going to happen? And to be fair, it's taken the better part of a decade. But what we're seeing now in the trends for our infrastructure in the next year here is a massive shift towards being able to facilitate these electric vehicles as an asset of the grid. And it's a very exciting trend that is opening up new business models, new opportunities for our society at large.
I think that's so exciting, that prospect of decentralized energy management and what it brings, like shopping malls being energy reserves. Your car is an energy reserve, your house, so you have flowing energy around, and you don't have that lights out situation anywhere. We are getting towards the end of our time, and we're being kicked out by our wonderful organizers here. So let me finish up with one last question regarding incentives and bans, because I think this is what has been also on the minds of many people. And California has banned, I think, gasoline cars by 30, new sales of gasoline cars by 35. So John and Spencer, what is the incentive way? What is the carrot and what is the stick to get America emission-free on transportation by 2050? Easy question. Spencer, you go first.
Sure. Well, listen, the ultimate carrot for us is consumer demand, right? People coming into dealerships and they're going online and saying, hey, we want an electric vehicle. And so we're making big marketing investments and just through our overall communication strategy, trying to get people excited about the technology. So that's the biggest carrot. There are, not to get too into the weeds on specific policies, there are clean fuel standard programs at the state and at the federal level that could be a carrot that brings actually the energy world and the automaker world together to create a financial incentive to deploy and prioritize volumes. But there's also, the disincentive on the consumer side, on the demand side, to say, hey, either it's going to be more expensive to drive or purchase a vehicle of a conventional drivetrain, or you just can't do it, and that's certainly where the governor of California is put down his marker. That's not yet codified in law, I should note. It's an executive order. So the legislature still has to weigh in on that, but those are the sort of the political details of this. And yeah, we'll see where the country goes. We typically, in the US, bans don't work as well here typically, but we'll see.
Thanks, Spencer. So banning gasoline vehicles is not going to happen anytime soon, I guess. John, what's your take on the carrot and stick?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think first I would say on the carrot side, and I see it as Siemens as a part of our role, is to ensure that the charging experience gets better and better, and that it's open, accessible charging for everyone, faster and faster, easier and easier, and more prevalent. And so I think, you know, that's really at the heart of this transformation, is the build out of that infrastructure in a cost-effective and scalable manner. And, you know, the different advocacy and policy aspects of this, the different carrots and sticks, they're going to be a natural transition. But I would say one of the most positive things I've seen is where different stakeholders come together. And prime examples that exist in California are things like where electric utilities are allowed to work with cities and municipalities to go provide infrastructure and scale it up and help to close this gap. And when we do things like this, what we actually start to do is transform the end customer experience. So people come into more of those Audi dealerships and ask for the electric cars. And so I think for us as a technology provider, that's really at the heart. We feel like it's our job to work very hard on the technology and to ensure that it is the best experience. And then, you know, I would certainly comment that what we do see is where cities have mandates for urban city centers by date X, we are finding, of course, that those are accelerating those cities and areas to be some of the first movers for this market and these trends. And it's not even restricted to light duty. We find that the things like logistics, things like workplaces are also trying to transition at a rapid clip to deal with these factors. So I would say make sure you consider the entire transportation chain when you put together such initiatives and policies. But it's it's an exciting time right now.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Spencer and John, for this extremely, I think, great holistic view on electrification of the society and the roads and the technology. I mean, what I can hear from the collaboration side and where the entities can collaborate, the technology and the innovation which is coming from your companies and many German companies, you know, to make it happen. And finally, the behavior, the consumer demand. I mean, that we want to become sustainable, that we want to have electrification on the roads and zero emissions. I think this is the outcome. And I think our audience has proved it. Thank you very much to our audience for the great questions. We have already too much questions, which is always a good signal. I would have had more Slido questions for you, but we're running out of time. So thank you, John. Thank you, Spencer. Thank you for our wonderful audience. We'll have to do this again sometimes because we have so many active participants. Over to you, and thank you from my side. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you. Yeah, I can only thank all the speakers and for this really interactive session. We knew that mobility and e-mobility is an extremely popular topic, and to make this interactive and have all these questions by the audience answered is fantastic, and see where the technology is going. So thank you very much. On behalf of the JBC, for those who don't know me, I'm the Executive Director of the German American Business Council here in Boston. This is a series that we are actually producing right now, and we have one more event coming up in our Smart City series, and the topic will also be on mobility. But just from a slightly different angle. It is Keep It Flowing, data technology for mobility, that we are offering in May, about 4 weeks from now, exactly on a Friday, with a representative from Bosch North America, Paul Thomas, as well as a public representative from the city of Boston, Chris Carter. So please join us. Go to our website, gabc-boston.org. The registration is open already. I would also like to mention, since we do have guests here today joining us from California and from GABA, California, there's an event going on AI on Monday, April 19th, sharing AI knowledge and harnessing the future of innovation in a German-US partnership. It's a large event on Monday with representatives both from Germany and the United States. Also, that event is up on our website and will take you to GABA, California. If you do have any other questions about organizations, our organization, check us out, contact me, and join us again. Again, thank you to our speakers. Thank you to Niko and everybody joining today. I wish everybody a wonderful rest of the day and a great weekend. Thank you.
Same here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.